I was in prison, not as an inmate, but as a preacher. I had hurt people just like they had, just less obvious than the ones who sat before me. This is a story of one such victim. However, at that point, he was my best friend.
In 1966, I was attending a local college. George was a hyper good-natured fellow, and we had a lot in common, except for our faiths. George was one of those guys who you could just ping-pong your beliefs back and forth across the table of curiosity and candidness. He was a great guy. My friend was walking me through his view of heaven, explaining it like an onion with several layers, the innermost layers being the sweetest and the core being the ultimate paradise. I was a little uncomfortable, having been raised with the black and white heaven-hell mindset, which resembled less of his onion and more of a frying pan that the onion was being sautéed in. As he finished his explanation, he laughingly challenged, "So Bernie, what do you think?" Well, the Bible speaks rather clearly about there being two ultimate destinations after we die, heaven and hell. That last word I really had to push out of my mouth. Hell. After all, who wants to sour a fun, easygoing conversation on heaven with the idea of eternal damnation? Well, he continued to paint me into my spiritual corner with another question. "So where do you think I'm going?" Wow, what do you say to that when your best friend asks you? I've known all my life never to judge or condemn our fellow man, especially when it comes to eternal life, but I had to speak the truth. And this wasn't judgment, this was the Bible. And this was my best friend and his life. Not this current life, but his ultimate life was on the line. "Come on, Bern, do you really think I'm going to hell?" Well, I knew for a fact that the Jesus who George deliberately followed and the works-based rules his church heaped upon redemption, and well, it just effectively sucked all meaning from the words free and gift, and I knew these things about George's beliefs because he told me. He was really good at explaining them. And so I looked down at my shoelaces and then said, "George, if you deliberately reject the Jesus of the Bible and deliberately embrace a different message of redemption other than the one taught about exclusively in the Bible, then yes, you'd be going to hell." Despite my loving motive for trying to point him in the right direction, my words dripped with judgment. What followed was very unexpected. I don't believe that about you. George, you've got to understand that this isn't me making this up. I have to tell you this because this is what Jesus said. He's the one who said that he is the only way, the only truth, and the only life, and the alternative being a very painful consequence. Well, this conversation we had was the last one. The next day, George was being shipped off to China for a mission trip with his own church. I pursued seminary from then on out, looking for answers to this conversation that haunted me for years, because it's painful seeing your friendship fall shattering to the floor because of a tablecloth I had ripped off.
As I looked up from my notes, what I saw was impossible. There stood a withered man about my age in a dirty orange jumpsuit. I leaned forward into the microphone. "Yes, sir?" The wrinkled face was chiseled from stone. No man weeps in prison, but this wasn't a man. This was George. As he spoke, his hands were shaky. He said very simply, "My life," with his faded tattooed hands outstretched. "I've deliberately followed different Jesus all my life, but never the one that you spoke about that day in 1966, Bernie. I'm done with onions."